Tonight, hospitals at breaking point. Ambulances queue for hours with COVID patients on board. A vaccination blitz in Sydney's hotspot suburbs. 500,000 Pfizer jabs on the way for the under 40s. Also tonight, desperation on the tarmac. Thousands try to flee the Taliban, packed inside a US Air Force plane. President Biden stares down the critics who are calling this an American-led catastrophe. Back home, interest-free loans up to $3,000 for those doing it tough in lockdown. And our greatest ever Olympian arrives home after her Tokyo triumph.
Live from Sydney, 7 News with Mark Ferguson.
Good evening. A growing number of outbreaks across multiple Sydney hospitals has the state's health system under intense pressure tonight, with COVID-positive patients left queuing in ambulances outside a major emergency ward. This is a live look at the Olympic Park hub following another bumper day of vaccinations. 452 cases were recorded today, along with another death, taking the toll from this outbreak to 57, more than half the state's total casualties since the pandemic began. As the Premier announced a vaccination blitz, more than 500,000 shots for young people in those red zones. It came with a warning infections may have been down today, but that won't last.
A COVID crisis zone outside Westmead Hospital's emergency department. At least a dozen ambulances, more arriving, all with infected patients waiting inside, paramedics outside, many on the floor for up to 5.5 hours.
The public should be outraged. The strain on the paramedic workforce at the moment is unlike anything we've ever seen.
Evidence from the Paramedics Union of the desperate situation last night. Doctors wheeling equipment to patients for checks, even chest x-rays, before they can be admitted.
That's not unusual. It happens in every system across the world. In urgent times, it also happens during flu seasons.
The ambulance service has responded to the union's concerns, saying they'll provide paramedics with chairs.
It is not acceptable in Sydney, or New South Wales for that matter, for this to be now just accepted by the Health Minister as the new normal.
The confronting scene coinciding with an alarming spike in admissions overnight across Greater Sydney. The number of Delta sufferers being treated in hospital up from 391 to 447.
We're in the middle of a pandemic. That's not rocket science.
But the Minister admits new hospital infections are stretching resources. 38 cases now from 2 separate outbreaks at Nepean. At Canterbury Hospital, 7 cases and 2 wards closed. A staff member at RPA has tested positive. 6 people, including 2 staff, infected in St George's oncology ward.
The result of that, just in that one fairly small case, has taken out 80 health staff for the 14 days quarantine. So I think that's fairly indicative.
They're tired. An acute situation is now an absolute chronic situation.
Westmead Hospital is where a woman in her 70s died overnight. This outbreak's 57th death, more in the past 5.5 weeks than the previous 17 months, which included the Ruby Princess and Newmarch House outbreaks. And a warning from the Premier, the situation will likely get worse.
I say that only as a realist, because when you have cumulative days of high case numbers, there is a tipping point where case numbers go up.
Of the 452 new cases, 100 were in the Cumberland Council area alone, also high in Blacktown and Canterbury Bankstown. The suburbs of most concern: Seven Hills, Marylands, Guildford, Auburn, Bankstown and Greenacre. Over the past 2 weeks, more than 70% of new cases have been transmitted within a household, mostly amongst family members. But at least 100 times, a person has spread the virus while visiting another household where everyone is likely to become infected. Transmission between staff members in workplaces is also a significant problem, but there is little evidence of staff infecting customers.
We're really trying to focus the public's attention on those where we believe there is a true risk.
New South Wales Health no longer publicly listing most Sydney exposure sites as venues of concern for close and casual contacts. There are too many.
People just get lost in the detail when we put up venues that we don't think are risk factors.
They haven't given up listing them in regional areas, including Dubbo. Another 16 cases there, 2 in Bourke, and there's a new frontier, the first ever coronavirus case in Broken Hill.
And Alex Hart joins me once again. Alex, the Premier tried to clear up her comments yesterday that created some confusion about the easing of restrictions.
Yes, Mark, many people were shocked yesterday when Gladys Berejiklian said restrictions couldn't be significantly eased if cases remain so high, even when we reached that 80% vaccination rate target in November. Today, the Premier returned to her message of hope, promising we will enjoy some more freedoms from next month, even if case numbers keep going up. What those freedoms look like, though, is still very unclear. The only hints, low-risk activities for the fully vaccinated. The Chief Health Officer has been tasked to come up with options, and we're told some more details will be released or revealed next week. Mark.
Hope is important about now. Alex, thank you. 10 million Australians have received a jab, now at a record rate of almost 200 doses a minute. And more vaccine supplies are on the way. Let's go to Amelia Brace at the airport tonight. Amelia, you've got breaking news about a major boost.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. 450,000 doses of Pfizer touched down here at Sydney Airport a short time ago. They were flown directly from Poland and will form part of an upcoming vaccination blitz in the west and southwest of the city. And they are needed, with demand continuing to outstrip supply in those hotspots. Queues, crowds, COVID chaos, leaving those wanting to get the vaccine fearful they'd get the virus.
There were too many people. That was our biggest fear, saying that if somebody in this crowd gets infected, and all of us will end up in the isolation.
The Macquarie Fields hub inundated.
Yesterday we heard it's about 8 hours waiting.
At the appointment-only clinic.
It wasn't what I was expecting. They recommended 15 minutes beforehand, and I'm not sure what it's going to be now. Hundreds
left to languish as they tried to do the right thing.
There was a bit of criticism of the people of Western Sydney early on. I mean, look at these people behind us, standing in a car park in the middle of the day for hour on hour.
They are, persevering with long waits, but we've got to make sure that our systems are in place.
The perseverance is paying off, with vaccination rates across the West surging, increasing almost 14% in Blacktown, more than 13% in the southwest, 12.5% in Parramatta.
Can I thank everybody who's come forward? That is an outstanding effort.
While these scenes are frustrating, some might even say dangerous, authorities are heartened by the increased vaccine demand in these hotspots, especially with more supply coming online in coming weeks. 530,000 extra doses of Pfizer will go into council areas of concern to help immunise hundreds of thousands of 16 to 39-year-olds in the next 2.5 weeks.
We're excited by the opportunity, a little daunted by it, but I've got every confidence that we can do that in that time frame.
To help and avoid scenes like this, soldiers will oversee crowd control, with discussions underway about bringing stood-down Qantas staff online to help too. Amelia Brace, 7 News.
We'll have more on the state's evolving COVID crisis shortly as Operation Stay at Home ramps up. The police checkpoints trying to contain Delta's spread. Plus, details of New Zealand's snap lockdown as the virus reappears there after 6 months. He calls it messy, the images gut-wrenching, but America's president is standing by the rapid withdrawal that has helped hand the Taliban control of Afghanistan. Joe Biden returned from holidays only hours after these images were seen around the world. A picture of utter desperation. Thousands of terrified people risking their lives, some losing them, trying to flee their country as human cargo. Their images veterans are now calling profoundly shameful. But despite all the warnings, the US admits the fall happened faster than it ever expected.
If there is to be a defining image of the fall of Kabul, this will be it. Desperation on the tarmac. On this US C-17 transporter, people clinging to the undercarriage, the wheels and the hope of a ride out of Afghanistan. But for at least two, this is how it ended. Falling from an unsurvivable height, people watched in disbelief. Another three were crushed under its wheels. Some, though, did make it out, crammed into the hold, human cargo with just the clothes on their back.
Okay, how many people do you think are on your jet? 800 people on your jet? Holy cow. I mean, good job getting off the ground.
The true count, 640, a near record, hoisting themselves into the half-open ramp like this, the crew making the decision to save who they could. But thousands are still left, including some who'd assisted Australia.
This is the situation in the airport. We just got here and we don't know where to go and who to contact for evacuation.
They scaled the airport walls to get in. So many they could be seen from space, but so many flights couldn't land.
Civilians running all over the airfield, you will have to hold prior to landing.
Critics calling it one of the greatest foreign policy failures in history.
US helicopters trying to scare people.
That, while the Taliban they are so desperate to escape, was briefly distracted at a fairground. It was bizarre. Toy cars, real guns. These are the fighters that had just won a 20-year war with the West. Some even took time out at a gym, one with his rocket launcher. But the Taliban telling locals the heavy lifting is done. They'll rule in peace.
They should not be terrified. There will be no danger to their property, honor and life.
Few believe them, as a war that began with the 9/11 horror of those falling from the Twin Towers now ends with more falling from airplanes. Chris Reason.
US Bureau Chief Ashley Mullaney is live in Washington for us. Ash, the US President has seen those pictures and heard the criticism, but he's still defending his plan.
Mark, the President says the scenes in Afghanistan are gut-wrenching, but he is standing by his decision. The question hanging over the White House tonight is what went wrong? Was this a failure of planning or a failure of intelligence not to see the Taliban moving in so quickly? Either way, these are images that won't soon be forgotten, a stain on Joe Biden's presidency, but one he seems willing to wear.
Seizing control and the means to enforce it. This cache of weapons bought and paid for by US taxpayers. Just a fraction of the bounty now flaunted by Kabul's new militant rulers.
Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the US Embassy compound.
Reports as well, at least 2 US helicopters added to the Taliban's military might. Seeing the same pictures, the US President stood by his plan.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw US forces.
Breaking days of silence, Joe Biden returned to the White House, launching a stern defense of his move to end America's longest war.
That no amount of military force would ever deliver a stable, united, secure Afghanistan. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated.
He calls Kabul's growing humanitarian disaster a result of citizens not wanting to leave earlier, a rapid collapse he blames on the Afghan army's reluctance to fight.
American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves.
The president said that the buck stopped with him, but in fact, the speech was full of finger-pointing and blame, especially for the Afghans.
A catastrophe veterans call an insult to the nearly 2,500 US troops who died there.
This is profoundly shameful for our country.
Nobody listened to us. They didn't plan for the evacuation of our Afghan wartime allies. They're trying to conduct it now at the 11th hour.
Every terrorist around the world is cheering.
The President also made it clear this was a deal he inherited, a deal made by Donald Trump. He says he was faced with 2 options, either to follow through with the full withdrawal or to go back to fighting the Taliban. The latter he simply wasn't prepared to do.
From the former president, it's not that we left Afghanistan, it's the grossly incompetent way we left.
I would rather take all that criticism than pass this decision on to another president of the United States, yet another one, a 5th one.
In Washington, D.C., Ashley Mullaney, 7 News.
Our Prime Minister has conceded some Afghan allies will be left behind as the situation on the ground spirals out of control. Scott Morrison insists the planned rescue mission will still go ahead this week. as he tries to reassure our veterans their sacrifice was not in vain.
Heading out to be on standby in Dubai. 100 members of the 3rd and 17th Brigades joining 150 more in the Afghan rescue mission as the Prime Minister speaks directly to those who've served and the families of those who died.
I know today is a day of sadness and reflection for our Afghanistan veterans. There is no more decent and good purpose than being willing to serve the country that you love. I want you to know that we will continue to do everything we can for those who have stood with us.
RAIHAN says that's him.
Please save our life and save our children.
An interpreter for Australian forces in Uruzgan province in 2011, now with a wife and 2 small children, among 300 to 400 Afghans pleading to be rescued.
Our life is not safe.
Scott Morrison conceding.
Despite our best efforts, I know that support won't reach all that it should.
Some can't be found, others are now with the Taliban. But those Afghans already in Australia can stay.
We have no plans to be returning people back to those places.
For some Afghanistan veterans, the Prime Minister's reassurance today rings hollow.
You're left without your identity and you're left without that purpose that inspired you, and that's a very dangerous place for many veterans right now, and they're struggling.
With the Taliban now in control, terrorists set free from prison and women in hiding. How do you tell a young girl in Afghanistan today, maybe a girl as young as your daughters, that this is what freedom looks like?
I can say that Australia has done all within its power, all within her power, to provide safety for the people of Afghanistan. And what we see now is heartbreaking.
The rescue mission waiting for a safe window to get in, load and get quickly out. With former military leaders now openly declaring Australia's 20-year operation in Afghanistan a failure, Scott Morrison says he's confident this final rescue mission won't be.
You know me, I'm always optimistic. I'm probably one of the most optimistic people you know.
Facing the worst, hoping for the best. Mark Riley, 7 News.
Returning to the state's COVID outbreak now, and Chris Marr joins me. Chris, how busy have police been over the past 24 hours of Operation Stay at Home?
Mark, police have been very busy enforcing stay-at-home orders with a further 579 infringement notices issued. Now, today police were back at Sydney's beaches, including at Bondi, where a mounted camera with a 360-degree view was keeping watch. And in Sydney's west, there were police checkpoints in place on main roads at Bass Hill and Westmead, with officers stopping drivers. Now, along with infringements, police have handed out court attendance notices to 34 people accused of breaches, and nearly 4,000 welfare checks at homes, including in one case discovering a man believed to be COVID positive had gone for a drive.
If you're going to behave like this, if you're going to step outside the health orders, you will be checked on and you will get an infringement notice, and that person will continue to be checked on and make sure that they comply.
And with COVID cases escalating in the regions, the police operation has been very visible today in centres like Dubbo and Lithgow, and in Newcastle. A 22-year-old man will appear in court later this month for allegedly hosting parties attended by 2 young Western Sydney women who later tested COVID positive. Mark.
Chris Marr in Surrey Hills, thank you. New Zealand has recorded its first local COVID case in 6 months, sending the country into lockdown. The unvaccinated man tested positive in Auckland. It's likely he has the Delta variant.
We need to again go hard and early to stop the spread. We have seen what can happen elsewhere if we fail to get on top of it.
Panic buying has already begun, with most of the country expected to stay in lockdown for 3 days, Auckland at least a week. Time to check the forecast now. Angie, superb out in the sunshine today.
And Mark, thankfully, there was plenty of sunshine in the shade. Temperatures were quite chilly under a southeasterly wind regime. Our news chopper captured a sparkling city this afternoon, nice and calm on the harbour there, as opposed to the beach, where we saw some big waves today. It was a little bit warmer than expected as well, with a top of 20.3 degrees at Penrith, 20.6 in the city. Gusty winds impacted the state's southeast mainly. That's where maximums today have also also been quite cool, a top of 17 degrees at Batemans Bay, 12 was a top at Young and 11 at Goulburn. Around the suburbs now, it's 14 degrees on the beach at Manly. Feels like 11 out in the breeze though, 12 at Campbelltown with an apparent temperature of just 9. Another settled day on the way tomorrow. All those details soon, Mark.
Sounds good, Angie. Thank you. A woman has been killed, her husband injured after their caravan burst into flames on the Central Coast. Next, could an exploding gas cylinder be to blame? Also, Bob Dylan denies child sex claims dating back to the 1960s. Truck tragedy, a driver killed in a crash on the Hume Highway. Later, the hidden financial help for those cut off by COVID, how to apply. And why the mouse plague in our state's west is about to get a lot worse. That's next.